Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much, mon ami, for the introductions. But allow me to just provide some welcoming remarks before I hand over to the colleagues again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Amr Taha. I am here representing the regional network for the issue for a regional network on migration, which is also the issue-based coalition on migration for the UN Europe and Central Asia region. This is not the first time that we meet. Of course, some of you will remember that we met also in the past, and I'll make some reference on the progress that has been made to date. So I'm joined, of course, today by some other colleagues from the regional network on migration, from UNDP, Oksana, and from UNHCR, it's Aslak as well. And the three of us make up the co-chairs of the regional network on migration. We are in my opening remarks. Before I go on, I also want to welcome Irem Arf from the International Trade Union Confederation, who has agreed to take on the important role of stakeholder rapporteur, and I'll get to that a little bit as well in just a minute. So welcome, Irem, and thanks for agreeing to take on this important role. So today we'll discuss the two sessions. We've had a meeting with other stakeholders who have expressed interest in thematic sessions 1 and 2 already about roughly a month ago or so. And now we're having a dedicated meeting focusing on thematic sessions 3 and 4, with thematic session 3 being focusing on objective 14, consular protection, 15, access to basic services, GCM objective 16, inclusion and social cohesion, and 19 on migrant and diaspora contributions, 20 remittances, and 22 social protection. We're also going to discuss a little bit and share with you some of the progress made on to date, but on thematic session 4. So objective 1, which is data, 3, information provision, 7, reduced vulnerabilities, 17, eliminate discrimination, and 23, international cooperation. So these are the GCM objectives which we're going to be discussing under the two distinct thematic roundtables sessions. Apologies. But before giving you the floor to ask any questions, I'll give you an overview where we stand on the preparatory process, and then I'll hand over later to mon ami and from the Secretariat, who will be elaborating as well even more on how stakeholders can be engaged in the process, followed by an introduction by our Network Hub colleagues of the stakeholder discussion space, which you can also access online, this stakeholder discussion space. So since we met in January, as I mentioned, we've made some considerable progress in the preparations for the GCM regional review meeting. The first one being the registration process, which of course has been open. We've received several registrations already, of course, but the registration remains open until the 4th of March. So in case you have not registered or you wish to register any one of your colleagues or share the word, the registration is open until March 4th, so just a few more days. Member states are invited to participate at the highest level. We mentioned that and constantly refer to that, but also hearing your concerns about some member states not necessarily being very inclusive in their delegation. We have asked them to make sure that the stakeholders, delegates, or we've encouraged them to include stakeholder delegates as part of their official delegation. We've mentioned this during our briefings, and we've also mentioned this in the letters, in the registration letters that we have also shared with them. So we've encouraged them to ensure that stakeholders are non-governmental stakeholders are a part of the delegation that is participating in this GCM regional review. The Intergovernmental Conference, where the meeting itself with member states, as you know, will be preceded by a multi-stakeholder hearing on the same day from 8:30 to 10 o'clock in the morning Geneva time. And the stakeholder rapporteur, who, as I introduced, Irene Ma'arf, will brief the member states on the outcomes of those multi-stakeholder hearing discussions, which of course will inform then the opening session, but also the rest of the conference, the rest of the day of the conference. So a separate registration process has been set up for stakeholder participation. You will find more details in the revised concept note, which you will have received ahead of this meeting, as well as the logistical details on the information note, which you may find on the network website, if you wish to access that as well. So if you can't find it, please do let us know, and we'll direct you to it. You will receive e-badges confirming your registration shortly. So I guess after the registration closes on the 4th of March, we will issue these e-badges, so that then you can attend and participate in the relevant sessions during the GCM regional review. We will also have a speakers list, and in the spirit of the GCM, we will ensure all stakeholders to speak after a number of member states representatives have spoken. So again, it's an intergovernmental conference, so member states have a priority. This is really the rules of engagement. So given that we had planned for this event to be a couple of days, logistically, unfortunately, it was not possible. We had to limit it to 1 day because of pure practical reasons, that there is just no rooms available for 2 days in a row. So unfortunately, if we may not have time for everyone to intervene, member states will get a priority. But of course, you're also invited to share any inputs that you want to share, also in writing if you wish. But please understand us if there is no room or no time for any interventions during the sessions. But we hope to accommodate everyone. So we have had 2 informal consultations with member states, as I mentioned earlier, and promoted them to prepare the review in several ways. One of those ways is the focus on the discussion under each of the thematic discussion sessions will be how member states and stakeholders in the region have been cooperating together. So again, a nudge on cooperation between governmental actors and non-governmental actors in the implementations of the relevant objectives. We've also, during our briefings to member states, or these informal briefings, we as we assist the member states in preparing for this meeting and the conversations, the network has shared a set of guiding questions. You have received these questions in Annex 1 of the concept note. So please refer to those, because those are the questions that will guide the conversations, of course. Another bullet point I would like to share is to, taking note of the fact that the thematic sessions will only last 75 minutes, as I mentioned, for the time constraints and the space constraints that I mentioned earlier. Delegations are also encouraged to submit written responses to the guiding questions, and this applies also, of course, to you if you wish to share any inputs in writing. And it would be important, in fact, I would like also to encourage colleagues to share, stakeholders to share their inputs in writing, so then we can have also something to include in the outcome report, and to include also in the recommendations that then will be shared with that will be then shared for the International Migration Review Forum and for other events as well, such as the biannual report for the Secretary General, for example. There are several inputs that we can use. There are several reports where we can use your inputs. We've also encouraged governments to consult with their national stakeholders, as I mentioned, as they prepare for their participation in this review meeting. So again, we put it in the letter, but we also mentioned it during the meeting. More details are outlined in the concept note. But as I mentioned again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us for anything you require, and we will be able to direct you, if not answer your question directly, we will be able to direct you to the colleagues who may be able to assist you. These are the developments so far. And I hand back over to Mon Ami for the rest of the meeting. Over to you, Mon Ami. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Amr, for that progress update. I think very helpful information indeed for our colleagues here. And colleagues, welcome again to this, I think, third consultation we're having online and hybrid in the last couple of months. I'll be happy to share in the next few minutes some of the other developments as well in the process and what to expect ahead in the next 2 weeks. I'll then pass it over to our colleague Bethany to remind us about the discussion spaces that are up and available online for you to engage with. And then we'll begin the meeting with the 2 different sessions, 3 and 4, the panelists, discussion starters, and closing speakers, including our rapporteur, who we thank very much, Irem R. Rayfield. In terms of, in addition to what Amr has already reviewed in terms of developments and progress, I wanted to remind and emphasize colleagues here that we did begin this UNECE consultation process quite early with stakeholders back in November 14th with a pre-consultation. And to remind that the reason we are doing this in the second round of regional reviews, in fact, for all regions, is because of the feedback we've received from you as stakeholders to have consultations early enough so that they can inform the development and discussions around the agenda and the outcomes of the regional review meeting itself. And so I want to assure that your discussions, both in that 14th November consultation and the last hybrid thematic consultation on session 1 and 2, is well attended and listened to. The key messages have been shared by our rapporteur, Irem, with colleagues in the regional network in the UNECE region, and has been informing the development of the different discussions. In addition to these consultations, we were also very happy to be able to hold a breakfast amongst many of you who attended as stakeholders, as well as the European Network and IBC, with the champion countries from this region. That was done on, I believe it was the 1st of February, right during UN Migration Week. And it was actually a first ever such in-person gathering. And we look forward to this serving as an example and encouraging that greater interaction between yourselves, civil society, and champions in particular. I'll also say that in the last few weeks, we've also been working closely with Irem, and Irem in turn with many of you in civil society spaces, including, for example, the trade union networks, the Action Committee, Women in Migration Network, and other networks of civil society, to help to make sure that it is you that is drafting the agenda for the hearing, the stakeholder hearing that will be held in the morning of the 11th of March. That agenda is nearly finalized, including your recommendations for panelists, and it should be up online soon. We'll also hear from Irem later on in the session, a couple of updates on that agenda. In addition, I'll just lastly point out that we have heard several of the concerns coming from civil society colleagues about the lack of interpretation that would be available for the morning hearing on the 11th of March. And we assure you that because of this impediment, which we don't have control over, it has to do with the regulations of the Palais des Nations here in Geneva in terms of interpretation services, and the fact that the stakeholder meeting is being held for 1.5 hours in the morning for the various reasons Amr also mentioned in terms of the one-day agenda that we have in front of us. But because of that fact that it is a shortened hearing, this is the reason we've had over 6 hours of online and hybrid consultation on the thematic issues amongst all of you stakeholders. And that 1.5 hours can be viewed as a place to summarize the discussions. And the agenda, in fact, that has been shaped by many of you pulls out some of the key themes that you've already highlighted as a priority. And then, of course, the messages will be carried into the opening session of the intergovernmental meeting. And in addition to what Amar's also mentioned, I can't recall if he's mentioned this, but there will be stakeholders moderating each of the 4 thematic sessions in the intergovernmental hearing as well. So I think I'll end it there and pass it over to our colleague Bethany to remind us of the Migration Hub. Go ahead, Bethany.
Everyone, thank you, Monami. Thank you, Amar. I'll just share my screen so you can see where to find the Migration Network Hub. As you can see, the hub is part of the network website, and here we're hosting a discussion space to complement the consultations with stakeholders. So this is your space where you can post comments and responses to the guiding questions. It's an opportunity to provide links to the resources and more information about your organization and your recommendations as inputs into the process. So this space is public. It is the mandated space of the networks from knowledge exchange on the GCM. It's a key resource for member states as well as UN partners and stakeholders for GCM implementation. So it's a space open to all. It reflects progress on GCM implementation, and the aim is to promote inclusivity and interaction at all levels. Through engaging with the hub, we hope that you can contribute your experiences to support more effective GCM implementation. You can find it here, and when you look for the discussion space, it's very easy to find either here or in the drop-down menu here, and the space is available in English, French, and Spanish, and for this discussion, we're welcoming replies in Russian as well. Other features of the hub include the repository of practices and the library, a demand-driven facility where you can request support and guidance. There's online training there. So we do encourage you to browse those resources and make sure that yours are also part of this knowledge base. You can go ahead and upload content. But here in the discussion space, you can reply to the guiding questions, which mirror the questions in the consultation. You'll see it's very simple to log in. If you're not already a member, you'll be asked to create a profile, and then after that you can post a reply. But everybody can see the responses before you log in. So this is public. As you can see, the moderators are posting here. And please remember that if you want to, you can even use the checkbox to post your messages anonymous. So you can choose to identify yourself, or you can post your responses to these questions anonymously. And any technical issues, please feel free to email us, and we can also post on your behalf if any difficulties. So this is the space, and it will remain open for the duration of the regional review process. So you may post your responses now, during or after the consultation. As feedback, there will be a second round of discussion. But for this phase, we have the guiding questions that are currently being discussed in this online consultation. So please be in touch if you have any problems. Otherwise, the floor is open, and feel free to post your message in the discussion space here. Over.
Thank you very much, Bethany. And without further ado, I would like to now turn it over to our colleagues who will lead us in the discussion of session 3 with the set of GCM clusters. And I'd like to introduce our colleague, Katharina Rump from the World Health Organization. Yes, please go ahead, Katharina.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Katharina Rumpf. I'm working in the Migration and Health team of the WHO Regional Office for Europe, covering 53 member states in Europe and Central Asia. And I'm here to give you a little bit of an introduction to session 3, a little bit of data trends and about the situation. And I'm also happy to share that the session on the 11th of March will then be actually moderated by Stella Opoku-Uvuso from Afford, and we will hear more about their work and their perspective on the objectives that we discussed today also right after me. So as mentioned by Anna in the introduction already, we're here to discuss objective number 14, consular protection, objective 15, access to basic health services, objective 16, inclusion and social cohesion, 19, migrant and diaspora contributions, 20, remittances, and 22, social protection. Let me start by saying that at the International Migration Review Forum, IMRF, in 2022, the member states reaffirmed the importance of international cooperation and their positive role and the contributions of migrants to inclusive growth and sustainable development in the countries of origin, transit, and destination. And I think we can't discuss everything, obviously, in a meeting like this, but on consular assistance, the first of the objectives, I would like to mention that also in the progress declaration of the IMRF, there were positive examples mentioned, and we could see that also now in preparation of the concept note that we're here talking about concrete examples like countries who have implemented one-stop shop mechanisms for consular services, but also increased support of digital tools, and all of that in a whole of route collaboration, not singularly focused on one country, but serving migrants along transit and also in destination countries. One of the examples we could highlight here would be the Portuguese government, where a number of exceptional measures were approved during the COVID-19 pandemic, where it was simply made easier for asylum seekers whose residency applications were still pending. Those were granted the status so that they could actually access services in the situation. Second would be the efforts to provide safe access to basic services. There we obviously talk about something that we as WHO work with our mandate directly on. So here we are talking about, for example, including access to healthcare and vaccines and have access to essential services. Just to remind us all of the COVID-19 situation, and I give some concrete points on how migrant and refugee population was affected by this was, of course, enhanced border restrictions, so decreased human mobility. A number of migrants were stranded, including seasonal workers, international students, and people were basically unable to return to their countries of origin or the countries that they were striving towards. Existing vulnerabilities were there is reinforced, and underlying inequalities became more prominent. So we could also see that in virtually all countries of which we have the data available, migrants were much more likely than the host community to catch the disease, to develop severe symptoms, and then also to face higher mortality risks. This also applies to vaccination. Migrants were also underrepresented amongst those who got vaccinated. And we could also see that most member states in the European region, at least in 2021, 2022, did not have specific immunization directives focusing on refugee and migrants. So the third one covered by this would be migrants play a key role in providing basic services. So we can see here also still the barriers that we need to discuss, or that you can discuss, that you can see from your perspective on how to actually contribute to providing services, and how to break down barriers to contribute. So there we have, as an example, we picked out Germany and the Republic of Turkey, where, for example, in Germany, the government had implemented a migration counseling service specifically for adult immigrants, providing integration courses for individuals aged 27 or older and their family members. Or in the case of Turkey, I think there is currently in the pipeline a proposal with the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund to foster opportunities for enhanced engagement between the migrant population and the host communities in the Republic of Turkey. I can see I'm kind of running a little bit out of time, so maybe lastly, let me pick out the topic of remittances. We can still see that, or we see that remittances are a critical source of support for families and communities, and it's important to talk, especially in this round, about it, because the UNECE region has one of the highest remittances rates in the world, and especially when it is about transfer costs for remittances, but also how digital remittances channels are accessible in different member states. The distribution is very uneven and the barriers are there. As one of the positive examples here to mention again would be Malta implementing a solution for promoting faster and safer remittances services by issuing prepaid cards to unbanked migrants. So let me conclude by illustrating that the value of the 360-degree approach of the GCM is also kind of incorporated in how we work in the region with our WHO tri-regional high-level meetings. We have done them as a whole-of-route approach, so starting with one meeting in Istanbul representing Europe 2 years ago, and then last year in Sharm el-Sheikh in the Eastern Mediterranean region, where we look at migration and the issues we need to address across the whole route, so in countries of origin, transit, and destination. So in this spirit, we want to provide the space today for you as stakeholders to use this review to look at the objectives through a lens of collaboration and partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharina, for that overview on the set of objectives. I'd now like to request Richard Lee to take the floor from the Africa Foundation for Development, or Afford UK. Richard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to share and to start our discussions. My name is Richard Lee. I'm the Engagement and Capacity Manager at Afford. And majorly, as was already mentioned, the themes that the objectives that we're talking about. So my interventions will be based majorly on Afford's work and then relating it to some of the other works that everyone else has been doing. And to start, I'd just like to say that it's worth applauding the EU member states and citizens, especially for the way that they have supported Ukrainian citizens throughout the challenge they are facing, supporting over the past 2 years with the conflicts in which they are going, with access to basic services, promoting inclusion and participation, and social protection that has been granted. And it's one of the best examples of supporting migrants. And all migrants will appreciate this kind of support within the humanitarian space. And I think it's worth raising this point continuously. The issue is how can we continue to underscore this approach as a model that can be applied as a response from European member states as well in supporting everyone, because this shows us that there's a lot of political will for us to welcome people in an orderly, safe, and right-based approach. And then I want to also raise the issue around the new EU Single Permit Directive, which we believe it's also relevant and both addresses procedures for both work and residence permits that can promote equality and fair treatment of migrants, which can promote social protection, in particular concerning access to rights and access to basic services. Now, on the other issues of the objectives, diaspora and migrants in Europe, along with local authorities, are most of the time first respondents through sending remittances and during humanitarian crisis in terms of volunteering their skills and expertise. And organizations like Shabaka working with, for example, Meta in using WhatsApp in the case of Sudan to provide telemedicine for citizens in the current crisis that they are facing in Sudan. And it's worth something that we can look at. And on that front, a lot of different initiatives have been piloted by diaspora organizations, including Afford and many, many diaspora organizations. And we think that we pilot a lot of fantastic small-scale ideas and initiatives, and there's always the challenge of scaling it up. And we believe building the capacity of the diaspora organizations would help to make it much more sustainable and long-term effect for the countries of origin as well as countries of destination. And we at Afford have also continued to test a lot of projects around this, intervening in not only the remittance side, but looking at how remittances can be channeled into development and job creation. And we have tried that in a lot of ways, and around supporting SMEs on the ground to address the root cause problems of irregular migration. We've tried innovative ideas around bonds, around remittance loans and guarantee schemes for SMEs and entrepreneurs, and investors, so they can actually be able to impact the lives of people. And those targeted examples, we believe in the past, a lot of EU and UNECE member states, UK, Netherlands, supported a lot of diaspora initiatives. We've seen that a lot of that has gone down, but countries like Germany, SDC from the Swiss have also continued to take up that space and supported a lot of innovative things around channeling remittances into development and not just for individual consumption. And we believe that being able to draw a lot more of these initiatives will help to give the diaspora more access to be able to do a lot more for their countries. And based on time, I'll just like to focus on one of the things around the main GCM implementation. And Afford is also a member of the UK GCM Implementation Forum that consists of government representatives, INGOs, local authorities, civil society organizations, and this is coordinated by IOM UK. We believe it's worth emulating along a lot of the member states. It gives us a whole of the society approach, and it includes diaspora, migrants, and everyone else that has something to bring to the table. And we think that will help all of us to be able to intervene and actually form sustainable partnerships that can really help us to achieve the objectives of the GCM. The areas that we think we need to look more into is areas around skills transfer and volunteering, And we need to expand a bit more on those ones to allow people to give more to the society, to the countries of origin, as well as countries of destination. And another area that we believe is worth exploring, and we think this would be one of the main discussions in future, along with the implementation of GCM, is around arts, culture, and heritage. And we've been talking a lot also from GFMD and the UNM around narratives, and we think this is worth exploring. For us at Afford, we've looked at it more on the side of heritage for prosperity. That's still looking at how we can help to develop the sectors around hotels, around hospitality, curating, and museums in the developing countries as well. And we think this is something that is worth looking into critically. The last thing is also just to congratulate and indicate that though most of the time we talk about also the shrinking space of civil society, but we see a lot of effort being done, especially through these consultations, to bring a lot of civil society into the space. And we want to say that please continue to do that so that we can all share our views in the right way. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the consultation and engagement throughout. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for also sharing this, I think, very specific examples and suggestions, recommendations from your work and the work of colleagues in civil society. What we will do now is open up the floor for discussion. And we have until about 3:15. We could go further. So please go ahead and start raising your hands. We did receive requests, I believe, from over 35 people, but we'll go with those who are here and raising your hands. Otherwise, I'll go to the list we've received ahead of time. And please do have a look at the guiding questions. It was shared in the agenda in the chat, but I just want to briefly go over them. And these guiding questions apply to both of the sessions. So the first question is to cite some examples of promising practices and achievements on implementation of these particular GCM objectives, and as they relate to collaboration within this region, which is the focus of the review. The second question is what are the main gaps and challenges and the lessons learned to existing intra and cross-regional collaboration on implementation of these specific GCM objectives? Do you have suggestions as how to improve? Number 3 is outlining the areas where these objectives of the GCM in the region would benefit from strengthened cooperation, including capacity building, policy advice, data availability, technology, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and others. And likewise, outlining areas that have been prioritized or have gathered momentum and why you think that may be the case. And lastly, what are some of the key areas of progress, challenge, and opportunities on the implementation of GCM in the region that you would like member states to discuss during the review, and why is that the case? So with that, let me turn it over to the first set of hands. So first we have Andrew Hewitt from IFRC. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Chairs. Thank you for this opportunity to engage in this consultation. My name is Andrew Hewitt, and I speak on behalf of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, which is mentioned as a key implementing partner in paragraph 44. After discussing with our national societies in the region, we want to take this opportunity to recognise some of the progress made, but also highlight some of the challenges in regard specifically to objectives 15 and 16. So I'll start with the progress made. We acknowledge the efforts undertaken by various stakeholders to develop policies that facilitate the social and economic integration and inclusion of migrants. These policies are crucial to create more inclusive societies. We also want to emphasise that the compact only has meaning when implemented on the ground. And to help translate commitments into action, more support should focus on the local level. By engaging and collaborating with local governments, organisations like Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies can better address the needs of migrants and promote their empowerment while contributing to a more welcoming, safe and inclusive communities. We also acknowledge the proactive approaches to support the inclusion of migrants in host societies, such as through the provision of language courses. Language proficiency is a fundamental enabler towards the inclusion and integration, allowing migrants to access education, employment, social services, and language courses promote agency and empowerment. However, we have also encountered some challenges. Migrants continue to face barriers in accessing essential services throughout their migration journey. The impact of this is especially acute for migrants who have suffered abuse or exploitation. As the IFRC network, we are dedicated to eliminating barriers that hinder migrants from accessing crucial services through our humanitarian service points, where we provide information, healthcare, education, protection, food security. This is because in our action on the ground, we see that effective access to those services is still not a reality for many migrants, even though in many cases they may be entitled to such services. Bureaucratic hurdles, lack of awareness about available support are among some of the main barriers facing migrants. Our global route-based migration program is designed and determined to support and protect migrants along these routes. Digital exclusion also presents a significant barrier to accessing information and essential services, particularly for migrants who have limited literacy or technological skills. The accreditation of qualifications and certificates is critical in the inclusion journey of migrants in order to build a sustainable livelihood. We call for a more coherent way of addressing this issue as we witness the struggles migrants face in having their skills and expertise recognised. Despite progress, many migrants still harbour fear and mistrust towards authorities and organisations due to concerns about their status. This fear can deter individuals from seeking essential services and protection, further exacerbating their vulnerability. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated resource constraints, particularly in terms of reception centres and accommodation. Inadequate facilities and infrastructure for reception, accommodation and housing in the region for migrants led to overcrowding and destitution amongst migrant populations, exacerbating their vulnerabilities and impacting social cohesion. We witnessed disparities in the support provided to different migrant groups, leading to inequities in access to resource and services. It's essential to adopt a more inclusive approach to address the needs of migrants, regardless of their background or status. And the proliferation of anti-migration narratives perpetuates stigma, discrimination, and xenophobia, undermining efforts to promote social inclusion and cohesion. Addressing these narratives requires a collective effort. There's an urgent need to consider how we talk about migration, particularly in a year when citizens of 64 countries will head to the polls. There is a danger that in too many countries, anti-migrant sentiment will be further politicised. Migration is a phenomenon, but not a crisis. And finally, it's crucial to ensure that migration policies uphold humanitarian principles and respect the human rights of all individuals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for raising these very salient points. And also, I think some of the nuanced understanding of access to services, and you mentioned the fear that migrants have for various reasons also as a barrier. I turn it over now to Vladimir, and while Vladimir is speaking, I invite other colleagues, many of whom who've requested ahead of time, to please go ahead and start raising your hands so we can move to the next speakers afterwards. Vladimir, please go ahead.
First of all, greetings to all of you. Greetings, Mrs. President. I'm from the Network of Migrant Associations in Spain. And I would like to mention some positive aspects that some governments implemented. In Spain, there's been a reform of the law in order to give access to a group of migrants, especially students. Today, there's a second new law in that same line. But we have concerns when we talk about Objective 7, reduce vulnerabilities of migrant people. We only talk about migrants, but what about people as we are? People, for instance, I'm a Spanish citizen, but socially speaking, I'm still seen as a migrant. And so labor conditions are different. It's very difficult to access to the market. We see our identity in our association. We receive young people that are helpless because they don't find a job. And we are concerned because it's a vulnerability situation for those young people. They are members of the diaspora, they are Spanish, but they cannot access to unemployment and they cannot enjoy their rights. We have another concern about Objective 17, discrimination and xenophobia. This is a reality. We urge governments to work on that in a very important way because racism is there, is against our rights. We have problems in the streets, in the squares. Sometimes we have the problem to have access to services. We also ask governments. Now I'm talking about Objective 23, international cooperation. We need co-development. We must be included in the process, in the development process, because otherwise it's done from Europe or from countries that receive migrants, but not taking in mind the reality in the countries. We as migrants, it's a reality we know very well. And in the other group, Objective 19, migrant and diaspora contributions, as it was mentioned before, during COVID pandemic, it was fundamental. And I would like to share with you that some governments gave papers to migrants needed in the health service system, but after that, they were left behind. So I don't think that's a good perspective, and we ask governments to give documents to those people and to keep them in the system. Objective 22, social protection, we ask governments as a good practice to have bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements for social security. In Europe, in the European Union, we have social security, but when we go back to our countries, that social security, that money stays in Europe and it doesn't go to our countries. And when we get old and we are retired, this is money we could have and enjoy when we are old. So this objective is very important for us, and we ask governments to sign bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements for social security and pensions in order to move those funds that have been paid in Europe for social security and protect the life of migrant people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And I'd like to call on next Philippe Nanga, followed by Stephanie Sepulveda. Philippe, please go ahead. Philippe, are you with us?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yes, good afternoon. Bonjour. Good afternoon. Bonjour. Good afternoon. Sorry if I have a weak connection here. I hope you can hear me. I will speak about 3 points. And I'll start again with racism and xenophobia, which I think is an essential obstacle and a very real problem for us in Central Africa. With a very negative outlook for us and a lot of very negative reactions to people from abroad who migrate either into the Central African countries or travel away from them. That's the first topic. Second topic, there is instrumentalization by politicians of racism and xenophobia. And many politicians feel that supporting migrants in any way or providing migrants with any of those essential rights that they need might be negative for them. And somehow this creates a situation where a lot of politicians refrain from doing what they should do. In order not to be personally then criticized. I must admit, however, that there seems to be a bit of an improvement in the relationship between some civil societies and governments. I'm thinking about Cameroon specifically, where the public authorities are now willing to establish a dialogue with civil society organizations. And I must say that more efforts must be made to ensure that a genuine dialogue is put in place. Very often when any dialogue starts, the initiative comes from civil society organizations and not enough from governments. That is true for West Africa, it's true for Central Africa. So the dialogue must be promoted and not just by civil society organizations. Moving on to cooperation. Again, there a lot needs to be improved in terms of how regional and sub-regional organizations cooperate. And I'm thinking about the African Union here, the SEMA, the CAC. A lot more should be done in Central Africa, particularly to cooperate better at regional and inter-regional level. We have these organizations. There needs to be more cooperation between them and civil society. If you look at the African Union, yes, some meetings take place, but often at the request of other regional bodies, including the EU. I think the African Union should definitely consider that establishing cooperation and a dialogue with civil society organizations in the region must be a priority. And I'll finish with one point. Migration, I think we all want it to be, I would say, understood better by all citizens. To have this understanding, I think we need a multi-level dialogue to take place. We need to decentralize the discussion about migration. And there should be not only us now, a debate at national level on migration, but there needs to be similar, simultaneous, parallel dialogues at sub-regional level, at municipality level. If we have that sort of dialogue at all levels, things will improve. I'll finish with the IOM. I think I'm not quite sure how things are done, but I think there is a small issue in terms of how, at national level, we, organizations like mine, can cooperate with IOM. We receive people here who have been supported in returning home, so they come back but they face lots of difficulties. And supporting them once they have arrived here is often a problem. And I think we need to improve the way we welcome people, support them, and that needs to happen at all levels. We need more cooperation between IOM, between national member states, and with organizations and migrants themselves, and of course support these people in having access to their rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. I'd like two reminders. One is if colleagues can please keep your interventions at 3 minutes or less. We have now a few more speakers and we have 15 minutes before we move into the next section. And secondly, just a reminder, the focus of this consultation is the UNECE region, which means this covers stakeholders and discussions focusing on Europe, which includes the EC region, includes also Central Asia and North America. So I know, Philippe, you also mentioned some cross-regional dynamics and matters, which is definitely of relevance. But I turn it over now to Stephanie Sepulveda, followed by Miranda, and then we have Alexandra, followed by Paula, and then we will close this session and move into the next session. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Thank you, mon ami. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Sepulveda. I am the specialist on immigration and labor at the AFL-CIO, which is the largest federation of unions in the United States. We represent 12.5 million workers, 60 different unions across every industry, and we represent workers no matter what their immigration status is, their country of nationality, their race, their gender. And I welcome kind of all the interventions that we've heard today and the opportunity to comment on the GCM and the progress that we've made so far. I think it's very important, we have these sessions, and because of the structure and the limited time, we focus on key objectives, and I'll get to those, the ones that are kind of the main objectives of the session, but I really want to emphasize the importance of Objective 6, which has to do with recruitment and decent work. As labor unions, as the labor movement, we really want to emphasize the importance of labor rights, including freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining, for migrants, countries of origin, transit, and destination, and how important those rights are to ensuring that migrants have the right to stay, migrants have the access to decent work, and in countries of destination, migrants can access a lot of the goals of the various objectives of the GCM. And so any solution, any efforts that we make to implement the goals and the objectives of the GCMs have to have a rights at the center, a rights-based approach, and decent work, I think in particular, has to be central. And that means ensuring that when member states are working to implement these objectives, they use that tripartite approach that is very important, that brings in government stakeholders, brings in civil society, brings in trade unions to ensure that workers' voice are at the center. We know that what brings a lot of migrants together all over the world is the fact that they need to work wherever they are at, right? They need to provide for their families, and they need to do so with dignity and with the ability to avoid exploitation, which we know that because of the precarious nature of migrant status, they are quite vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. And so we see that countries must continue to affirm the right to freedom of association and collective bargaining for all migrants, regardless of status. And I think in terms of this session, we see that directly relate to Objective 15, access to basic services, Objective 16, inclusion and social cohesion, and Objective 22 about social protection, because all of these objectives have to do with inclusion into receiving societies, being able to work, being able to be integrated into society, and that often means being able to find a job that pays a decent wage, that pays a living wage, and the ability for migrants and immigrants to not just have access to work, but have rights at work. And that comes with the ability to, speak up when your rights are being violated, the the ability to access, basic healthcare, social security, all those things that citizens of a country usually have, and the ability to do so not just on paper, but to actually be able to do something about it when your rights or your access is being violated. And I think we have seen that having a union, having the ability to act collectively, to have your voices heard, is one of the best ways to ensure that social protection and that access to services, oftentimes when it exists on paper, as we know in many countries, but it doesn't really exist in practice. And so I would just say really quickly that in the United States, we have a very union-friendly government that has taken a lot of steps to ensure that immigrant workers are able to exercise those rights and access those rights, even when they're undocumented or they don't have work authorization. When they experience labor rights violations, they're able to speak up. And because they speak up, then they're able to get work permits and regularize their status temporarily in order to be able to hold employers accountable for any abuses that they experience on the job. And so I encourage other countries to think about ways in which we can ensure that migrants who are at the workplace have representation and have access to these rights in ways in which they can use their local unions or their collective power to hold employers accountable for abusive practices, especially when it comes to social inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, I think for those core reminders around these objectives. I pass it on now to Mirana Rajaharrison, followed by Alexandra. Mirana, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. I am going to speak in French. Thank you. Donc, je suis Mirana Rajaharrison. Je représente.
My name is Mirana Rajaharrison. I represent a diaspora. I'm based in Belgium, and I wanted to talk about Objective 15, basic services. We have just finished a training about the digital services directed to women migrants, and I was shocked by the level of digital literacy of these women. So in these basic services, we have to include digital services, because if we are not up to date digitally, then we are not able to fill in applications, forms online. We are not able to sign in for administrative services online. So I wanted to raise your attention on that. When it comes to Objective 16, many efforts have been made, but mainly for people that are part of a regularization process. For undocumented people, nothing much is done. Not much is done. And we know that inclusion is done through work. Since undocumented people do not have access to work, they are excluded from society. And finally, I would like to finish with Objective 19. I wanted to highlight the very good example of France through the Praozim funding. It is a funding that encourages diaspora to make funding schemes, to create funding schemes in their country of origin. So what we would like is countries to create a system of funding or a funding mechanism at the scale of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mirana. Alexandra, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Alexandra Noyes Menendez, and I'm the Europe Regional Lead at Migration, Youth and Children Platform, which is the migration constituency of the major group for children and youth. It is an honor to be here today, participating in the consultation and adding our voices to the discussion. As young individuals, we recognize the intricate nature of migration and its profound impact on our world. Growing up in an era of globalization, we've seen borders become more penetrable and witnessed the deep interconnection among those from diverse backgrounds. We've also observed firsthand the valuable contributions migrants bring to our societies. Our generation stands united in our dedication to upholding the dignity and rights of all individuals, regardless of their migratory status. These young individuals, full of hope and dreams, often face roadblocks when accessing essential services like education and healthcare. Language barriers, lack of documentation, and even discrimination can create insurmountable walls, hindering their potential and leaving them vulnerable. The consequences are far-reaching, impacting their physical and mental health, but also limiting their opportunities and ability to integrate into our society. This is a missed opportunities for our communities. Young migrants bring diverse perspectives, skills, and experiences that enrich our societies. However, without access to essential services, their potential remains untapped. We must do better. We must ensure that all young individuals, regardless of their background or migration status, have equal access to education and healthcare. This means investing in language learning programs mentioned by IFRC, equipping young migrants with the skills to communicate effectively in their new environment, which is crucial for integration and access to services, equipping educators and healthcare providers with cultural competency trainings, which allows them to understand better and cater to the specific needs of a diverse population, promoting inclusive environment within schools and healthcare settings. These environments should be welcoming and supportive, fostering a sense of belonging for all young people, which is why GCM Objective 15, access to basic services, is a priority for young people. Developing and implementing national action plans. These plans should be prioritize the needs of young migrants when it comes to accessing these services and allocate resources accordingly. Fostering collaboration across sectors, education, healthcare, and other relevant industries must work together to create a holistic approach for supporting young migrants. And there are innovative youth-led initiatives targeting the root causes of xenophobia, strengthening community unity, and referrals to services to help integrate migrants. Some examples are the initiative of the finalists at MyCP Youth Leadership and Innovation Awards, including Peace Therapy that provides mental health support for migrants and refugees, and Legal Culture NGO, providing pro bono legal advice to migrants. There are successful policies, such as the ones WHO mentioned, which is the Portugal's grace period for migrants to access health services regardless of their status. Finally, investing in young migrants' access to services is not an act of charity. It's an investment in our collective future. By ensuring their well-being, we unlock their potential and empower them to contribute meaningfully to our societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And our last comments will be from Paula Ciment. Paula, please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Thank you for organizing this consultation. I'm Paola Ciment from the Women in Migration Network. It's a global network advancing the rights of women, migrants, and some of our members are based in Europe. So I will go ahead with the recommendations that we have regarding Objective 15. There are barriers to access the services that harm migrants and society and may also constitute unlawful discrimination prohibited under international human rights law. We ask governments in the region to safe access to services that mean that all migrants, regardless of status, have genuine access in practice, where migrants, especially migrant women, have information about available services in language that they can understand, do not find cost a barrier to accessing services, can safely get displaced where the services are provided, receive culturally appropriate services, and do not fear that accessing services will put them or their family members in danger of targeting by immigration enforcement authorities. And regarding Objective 16, we affirm women's human rights, including migrant women's rights in policy, including women's freedom from violence, access to healthcare, including reproductive and sexual healthcare, access to education and decision-making positions in all spheres of society, and ensure migrant women in all the diversity, especially those from racialized communities and gender-diverse migrants, can live free from violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paula. And with that, we conclude this first session on session 3, and we move into the next session 4 in looking at the next set of GCM objectives. And I turn it over to our colleague, Oksana Maikyukia from UNDP. Oksana, please go ahead.
Thank you, Monami. Colleagues, I hope you hear me well. Indeed, we will focus now on session 4, which will cover 5 objectives. Number 1 on data, number 3 on information provision, number 7 on reduction of vulnerabilities, number 17 elimination of discrimination, and 23 international cooperation. It was a pleasure to listen to the discussion earlier, and especially I was very happy to hear some of the interventions because, they come to reconfirm how much those GCM objectives are interconnected and how important it is to address not them individually, but look at them as a whole. And now, specifically on this roundtable, when it comes to these objectives, obviously, we have been looking at the trends, and when preparing the background note, we looked at the trends in the region. We tried to look also at some developments, some lessons learned from the IMRF declaration, which are reflected in the IMRF progress declaration. We could notice the increase in migration in the year 2022, which is also mentioned in the World Migration Report, with over 87 million migrants, international migrants, registered in 2020 only in Europe, with a huge increase from 2015, for example. And obviously, this shows that data is essential, and there is a reason probably why this GCM is number 1, because it is directly relevant to all the other GCMs. Without good data, without reliable data, there is no way we can develop policies that will actually respond to the emerging trends and needs when it comes to migration in the region. And again, availability of accurate, reliable, and timely data is extremely important, not just for the policies and the programs, but also to address the specific needs of various demographic groups with a focus on women, children. And I was happy to hear also the intervention from the youth organization earlier. It is extremely important that we take into consideration all the needs of various groups when it comes to migration. While preparing the concept note, we tried to identify a few examples, and if you have any other examples that you think are relevant for the specific objectives, although we already have finalized the concept note, we will be happy to hear them. Before I will go and through each of the objectives with a few background information, but also some examples that we have identified, I would just like to mention on the agenda, we are very happy to have a government representative from Kazakhstan. We will have the keynote speaker, Mr. Askerbek Ertayev, who is the chairman of the Migration Committee of the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of the population of the Republic of Kazakhstan. And we are extremely honored and grateful to have Ms. Michelle Levoy, the director of the Platform for Undocumented Migrants, who kindly agreed to moderate the stakeholder, on behalf of the stakeholder, the entire session. And we are sure that her expertise will bring an added value to the discussions there. Now, moving forward to the objectives, just wanted to highlight a few examples that we have identified, and specifically when it
I think we may have lost you, Oksana. Can you hear us? Oksana, can you hear us?
I can hear you very well.
Yes, we lost you for a little while there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Please go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I assume there was a connection issue. I hope you didn't miss much of my intervention. So going back to the examples, just wanted to highlight a couple of examples that we included in the concept note. And like I mentioned, it would be good also to hear any other examples that you think are relevant, but again, focusing on UNECE region. So for instance, I think when it comes to addressing discrimination and xenophobia, and also addressing the negative stereotypes often associated with migrants. We were looking specifically on North Macedonia, which implemented a joint program funded by the Migration and PTF, which specifically supported the government to design evidence-based and coordinated migration policies, but also raised awareness among the public to prevent xenophobia and stigmatization of migrants. Similarly, there is another MPTF project that is implemented in Serbia, which specifically focus on strengthened policy capacities at both national and local level. And here, I think it is important to stress the need to work at both national and local level. And this is extremely relevant for all the objectives of the GCM, I think, because very often when it comes to migration, the impact that we feel is mostly seen at the local level, and the local governments are the ones who need to deal with this impact and are in the first line when it comes to responding to the specific needs of migrants. Hence, I think it is extremely important to work at both levels, and here we have a good example that covers both dimensions. Other example, for example, when it comes to strengthening the capacities and evidence policy making that I mentioned earlier, is the UK government pledge to make more accurate and reliable data about migration policy available to the public. Likewise, we have the Prague Process Migration Observatory and the International Data Alliance for Children on the Move. We also included an example on the establishment of the Africa-Europe Mayors Dialogue, and we tried to provide a few examples when it comes to establishing of one-stop shops. And I heard some of the examples were also mentioned earlier by colleagues. For instance, we believe very good examples are Germany, Portugal, Sweden, for instance, which have established really good examples of support centers serving as one-stops for migrants to access various services provided by the government. In line with what I mentioned earlier. Similarly, in Belgium, there is a reach out team, and I think it was also mentioned earlier by the interventions. Last but not least, when it comes to the vulnerability, which is also one of the SDGs that we are tackling, there are several examples in the region, specifically in Central Asia, the projects which focus on addressing the vulnerability of various groups, including migrants, based on the leaving no one behind principles. And we have examples in Tajikistan and in Kazakhstan, which provide very good examples of how this work was done, again, at both national and local level. And last but not least, I would like to also mention, pause a little bit on the cooperation. I think it was mentioned a couple of times today, but I also heard it during the consultations on Roundtable 1 and 2, it is a key in order to ensure that we achieve the GCM objectives jointly. It is not a standalone issue, and obviously we need to join efforts when it comes to everything that we are doing in the framework of the GCM. More specifically, we have identified a few examples which might be also relevant, and again, it would be good to hear more. When it comes to strengthened cooperation, there is the European Union UN partnership to migration capacity building, which specifically looks at strengthening the capacity of the UN system to support the GCM implementation. Another example at the country level is the Azerbaijan. Excuse me,
Can we ask colleagues to please mute yourselves? We can hear background. Please go ahead, Oksana.
Thank you. And the last example maybe in this, and maybe more at the local level, at the national level, is the Azerbaijan Regional training center on migration, which also serves the training knowledge management hub across the region. Of course, there are many other examples. I will not stress them all. Important to say is that we really need to have a whole of society approach when it comes to addressing the GCM objectives, and not only these objectives, but all the objectives. And I'm really happy to see here again such a wide participation of stakeholders representing various organizations, diaspora organizations, trade unions, private sector, youth organization, women organization. And I think it's really good that we are in this together. Looking forward to hear your thoughts on that and further discussions on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oksana, for that comprehensive overview of this set of objectives. And I pass it now to our discussion starter, Michelle Lavoie from PICUM, the Platform for the International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants. Michelle.
Thanks so much, Mon-Ami and Oksana. I'd like to highlight a couple of points for 4 of the 5 objectives of this session. And maybe not only just points, but I guess I've highlighted also some questions for us as stakeholders, but also especially for policymakers. So the first one on data. I think, and all of these reflections are also based on looking at the Europe region in particular, kind of the EU kind of representing 27 states. So especially from this region, of the UNECE region, which is already quite big. So on data, I think there's an interest in, at least from a lot of stakeholders, in prioritizing gathering better data and evidence to better understand what are the current residence permit systems. How are decisions made concerning residence permits? As an example, in Eurostat, which produces statistics based on data in this region, there are many different databases on permits, but they don't have disaggregated data, for example, on gender and age. So that's one thing to look into. But then another question is, when we talk about data, which data is collected? Who's collecting the data? How is it collected? We see that there's more nuance and there's a balance that has to be made between calls for more data and the risks that are inherent between this relationship between data collection and what is done with the data. So, for example, Sweden and Finland have both made proposals that their various officials that would come in contact with undocumented migrants, whether they be healthcare officials, local authorities, education officials, would collect personal data from undocumented migrants and transmit that to immigration authorities. And there's a strong recommendation that's coming from many of the stakeholders in the previous session to have firewalls or to have no transfer of personal data. But it's also useful to know sometimes what is going on the ground. So the EU has the Employer Sanctions Directive, which says that undocumented migrant workers should be able to file a complaint with the labor inspector if they have been exploited or abused. And we heard that by stakeholders in the previous sessions as well. So we should have more data about how many complaints have undocumented workers filed, were back wages paid, were residence permit issued if there were severe exploitation. So in a sense, we also need this data. We need to make sure that undocumented workers can file a complaint safely and that the data is collected. So ideally, we could see which policies need reform. Where should there be better implementation? So that's kind of some points on data. Maybe going into Objective 7 on reducing vulnerabilities. I think it's quite known now, and I think this is a sub-message of the Global Compact, that irregular migration status causes vulnerability. And that's why we see all the references to the human rights of undocumented migrants, regardless of status, etc. It causes vulnerability because when people are undocumented, it makes them more vulnerable to people who want to exploit them, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in their personal relationships, whether it's on the street, or, it's so we know this is a reality. So one of the things then to look at is how to change irregular migration status into regular status. We've seen in this region, even in the past year, that there have been some regularization processes. So Ireland had a relatively good-sized regularization. But even in the past 6 months, Greece and France have had smaller type regularizations, both linked to employment, but promising practices. We also have the situation of at least 4 million Ukrainians who are in the EU with temporary protected status or under the temporary protective directive. But this will expire on the 4th of March, 2025. Many civil society organizations are pressuring to the EU, especially because this is an EU status, that the EU should act now, should act in 2024 to prevent hardship next year, that there should be a united EU response in addressing how to resolve the situation of people who have this status. And we should also look into the future for other types of situations. The two other points I wanted to make concerning vulnerabilities concern children and gender. So on children, we see in the chapeau, or kind of the brief description in Objective 7 in the text, that it refers a number of times to the best interests of the child. And the question that I want to ask here is a child rights impact assessment being done with any new law or policy proposals affecting migrant children? So as an example, the EU proposed the Pact on Migration in September 2020. Already when it proposed border procedures that wouldn't be applicable to all children, only specific groups and ages of children. But now, from early this year, from last month, from the political agreement that we now have on this pact, these border procedures will apply to all children. So from babies until the age of 18, whether children are accompanied, unaccompanied, etc. These border procedures will mean weeks and weeks at the border for people who arrive irregularly. And this means de facto detention. So it's very hard to see how this is compliant with Objective 13 of the Global Compact, where member states committed to reduce to ending detention of children. It's hard to see if any child rights impact assessment was ever done at any stage of that proposal. And the other question is on a gender responsive approach. That's also referred to a couple times in the text and also in the activities. And it's the same type of question. Are there any opportunities with any new laws or policy proposals to ensure that migrant women with irregular migration status can safely report, for example, if they're a victim of gender-based violence or other crimes? Here we have examples from the EU, which now has a political agreement on the Violence Against Women Directive, and which is soon to most likely have a political agreement on the Victims of Crime Directive. These are huge opportunities that one of them has been, in a sense, almost lost. The other one's still ongoing, but where we could see that under legislation that concerns violence against women or victims of crime, including gender-based violence, there could have been a way to ensure that women could do this safely if they were undocumented. And now we're at kind of a strange situation in the EU because we also have privacy legislation. We have the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, which in a sense says that the people's personal data should not be transmitted for reasons that are on immigration control. It doesn't mention that specifically, but it talks about personal data. And we have competing legislation. So unfortunately, migration enforcement or criminalization of migration seems to prevail in even these legal discussions. And this is what's blocking some of the more progressive elements, unfortunately. The last 2 points on Objective 17 on eliminating discrimination, a question would be, how can we ensure that migration management policies do not strengthen and reinforce racial profiling? And the example we want to give is the Schengen Borders Code. This is a political agreement that's also been reached at the EU level, which would allow police to carry out random document checks near internal EU borders with the aim of finding undocumented people. So the question is, how can the police carry out random border checks to see who's undocumented? how will they decide that? We've seen from ample research that police tend to stop people for checks based on racial, ethnic, or religious characteristics. We believe, without any specific prohibition of racial discrimination in this political agreement, that these checks will depend on people's decisions, the police's decisions about who looks like undocumented. So a question is, how can we ensure in other policy areas like anti-racism action plans that migration is considered? The EU has an anti-racism action plan. It was released the same week as the Pact on Migration in 2020. It doesn't even mention the word migration. So there's a strategy. I mean, this is something to look into. And this year we will also, hopefully, or next year, have the CERD and the Migrant Workers Committee Joint General Comment on Xenophobia. And finally, the last point on Objective 23 on international cooperation. I think many of us will be familiar with a number of examples of bilateral agreements that countries in this region have with other countries or entities. So, if I just say the words UK-Rwanda agreement, or Italy-Albania, or some recent ones, UK-Frontex, Germany with Georgia, or Germany with Morocco, also one from a couple months ago, the Nordic agreements between Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, with Frontex on return. So, of course, a number of these and other agreements develop safe and regular pathways for migrants, but many of them have elements that are on enforcement, return. So I would leave it with a question. If we look at many of these international cooperation agreements now and in the past 20 years, how many are about deterrence? And how can we switch that? That's what I'd like to end with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I think also for posing some thoughtful questions that can hopefully be continued in this discussion. So I'd like to ask now participants to go ahead and begin raising your hands to make comments. We have a good amount of time to take a number of comments. And we'll start with you, Maureen, from the Migrant Youth and Children's Platform. Maureen, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Maureen, and I'm the North America Regional Lead at the Migration Youth and Children Platform. We're very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion and amplify the voices of young migrants within the UNECE region. Children and youth of up to 25 years old account for approximately 21% of all international migrants. In 2023 alone, approximately 3 million migrants have crossed the borders of the Mediterranean, the African region, Latin America, and Asia to reach North America and Europe. Of these migrants, young migrants are often described as the most vulnerable among vulnerable people. In 2022, non-EU citizens in the EU faced over twice the risk of poverty or social exclusion compared to young EU citizens, with their unemployment rate 1.4 times higher. With the staggering number of young migrants in Europe, Central Asia, and North America, it is more important than ever to ensure that their vulnerabilities are addressed and reduced, including violence, discrimination, and trafficking. Further, there is an urgent demand for comprehensive and higher quality disaggregated data on migrants. This is essential to gain deeper insights into demographics and unique circumstances of migrant children and youth affected by migration. There is a distinct lack of data, which is crucial in crafting targeted policies and programs to address specific challenges and ensure meaningful inclusion in decision-making. Better data is vital for marginalized groups, including survivors of human trafficking, gender-based violence, ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA+ individuals, and others. Enhancing inclusivity in data collection and processing is critical, along with developing public policies that guarantee enhanced access to social, legal, and labor protection systems for migrant children and youth, regardless of their legal status. Youth call on governments and stakeholders to take proactive steps towards youth inclusion and data collection, processing, and improved access to better disaggregated data.
De datos para tener mejores datos desagregados. Ustedes han sido los líderes también contra el racismo, la xenofobia, y con iniciativas de integración. Instamos a los gobiernos a abordar las necesidades de estas personas vulnerables con programas que recuerden su exclusividad y su importancia. Trabajar mano a mano con los jóvenes es importante para garantizar la protección de todos, para una narrativa positiva y para implementar los objetivos del pacto. Además, los jóvenes instamos a acabar con la detención.
To prevent human trafficking, to protect its victims. In North America, highly qualified young migrant workers often face challenges securing jobs despite having legal status. We urge governments and stakeholders to collaborate in eliminating de facto inequalities and discrimination against young migrants, particularly regarding their access to job opportunities in destination and transit countries, to support their economic integration. Your support is vital for ensuring fair access to local labor markets by recognizing academic qualifications and foreign work experience. Enforcing labor standards is needed to eradicate abusive employment and discriminatory practices for both skilled and unskilled workers. As young people, we urge you to seize the opportunity to work together and evaluate the factors that prevent us from realizing the objectives of the GCM. Youth are at the forefront. We're eager agents of change, ready to take action and continue our critical role as partners and a recognized stakeholder group in this region's development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, for that reminder and that important call to action to partner with youth. I don't see any other hands, but let's see again who would like to come in. We have Vladimir, who did speak in the last round, but do go ahead, Vladimir. I don't see any other hands, but I'd like to encourage others who haven't taken the floor to please start raising your hands as well. Vladimir.
Muchas gracias, Monami, por... Thank you very much, Monami. And sorry, I'm insisting on data. Data for irregular migrants. Because this group of people are here. They are in the European Union, and data would help us to see how many of them are working, under which conditions, how many of them suffered discrimination. So we believe it's very important to insist on data. And I would like that governments have this data to work with domestic workers. How many women are working? Which are their salaries? And of course, following the results, we could see that these women are helping also in their countries of origin. We could know how many of them had kids in their countries of origin, and they leave them there with grandparents, and sometimes they are judged for that, while they are working very hard in order to help their families. So from our organization, we would like to insist on data in order to create inclusive policies, and we urge governments to see and to look at these invisible faces of migrant women, men. And as the young representative said, young people studied, and we could also know how many of them are working and in what kind of jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, for bringing that aspect of the issue. I just think we'll make a last call to see if there is anyone else who'd like to come in and comment on these set of GCM objectives. If not, we will move into the closing remarks. Okay. I don't see any other hands. So I think we can go ahead and ask our colleague to come in, Irem Arf from the International Trade Union Confederation, and who will be serving as the rapporteur for the stakeholder process, and followed by Aslak Salum Smoen from UNHCR, who's a regional network co-chair for Europe and Central Asia. Irem, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mon Ami. Can you all hear me well? Okay, I see heads. Thank you so much for organizing again this consultation and for the opening speeches and the starters for discussion and everyone's contributions. I think it's really rich. It repeats very much the richness of the consultation we had at the end of January, which was a hybrid one, where again a large number of stakeholders participated and provided inputs. And I can only assure you this is really helpful to create the report from these consultations to share with the member states for their review. Just a few words on how we will continue creating the report, and also a few words around the 11 March gathering meetings, first on the multi-stakeholder hearing and then on the intergovernmental conference. So far, as Mon Ami and Amr had mentioned, there have already been two consultations. One was towards the end of last year, where the kind of modalities and suggestions on modalities were collected. And then towards the end of January, there was a consultation around the first two sessions covering the remaining objectives of the Global Compact on Migration. Through which I, with the help of also other colleagues, prepared an initial report, which is shared with many of you also through the Action Committee of Civil Society Organizations. And I will continue to collect your inputs through that, and adding also today's inputs that you have been providing. Also, through the help of Action Committee, we reached out to members of the committee, but also other stakeholders to collect interest in speaking in the multi-stakeholder hearing, as well as contributing to the outline, the content of the hearing itself, which I think reflects the key issues that you all have been raising throughout this consultation process. So for now, the plan is to have the interventions of 6 stakeholder representatives around key issues that were identified. One around inclusion, which I think repeatedly comes up and covers many of the actually objectives that we discuss, be it in relation to the data collection or in relation to ensuring a whole of society approach. So in the inclusion conversation, we will hear speakers speaking to the need for ensuring migrant-led organizations, women's organizations, migrants themselves, workers, youth are all included in the design of policies to implement Global Compact on Migration, and then in their implementation and in their review. The second area that interventions will highlight will be around the pathways, because it was repeatedly and also today mentioned that the type of pathways migrants have to reach their destination determines in many ways the rights they will be able to have access to, the protections they will have access to, and how they can seek justice and remedies if those rights are violated. So we will have discussions around what type of pathways do exist exist in the UNECE region, and what are the gaps and the needs for improving those. And then lastly, the conversation will be around narratives. Again, also during the consultation at the end of January, and today several of you have mentioned criminalization, concerns around criminalization, but also the importance of narratives, the positive narratives. So how these are impacting migrants' access to services, migrants' access to rights and justice. This will be discussed through interventions again during the multi-stakeholder hearing. But the idea is to have speakers from the stakeholders who will open up those discussions, but to have also interventions from the floor for those of you who are able to join us in Geneva for that multi-stakeholder hearing to intervene and to raise your issues. We are hoping to have many governments also at the hearing, and I know that again, through discussions with the civil society groups and trade unions, we had suggested to invite some governments to also chair the interventions, to moderate the interventions by stakeholders during the hearing, so that they can also encourage other governments to participate. So I know the network has reached out to some, and hopefully will have more active engagement of governments to also encourage others to come and hear your contributions. And then again, as had mentioned, these during the intergovernmental hearing, which will follow the hearing of multi-stakeholders, I will be able to present a summary of the outcomes of these consultations. Of course, recognizing the little time that is available there is not sufficient to raise all the views, but we will also submit the report, bringing all the inputs together. But then the stakeholders themselves will have the chance to chair the 75-minute long sessions, the 4 sessions, which will be again around the GCM objectives that we run the consultations around. And I hope that will also give us a chance to contribute to the government's review of the GCM implementation in this region. Again, I'm providing the overview, not so much touching on the content, but of course, all your inputs today and during the first consultation will be incorporated around these key issues with good examples that you have shared, as well as the significant gaps, and repeating the importance of inclusion, and how especially the right to associate, the freedom of association for migrants, the importance of that, to be able to speak up for themselves and access their rights will be repeated. Thank you very much. That would be from me, mon ami, and I pass the word to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Irem. Very helpful to know kind of what to look forward to ahead in the next few weeks, as you have laid out very well for us. So I pass it over now to Aslak and ask Aslak to please conclude with your remarks.
Thank you very much, mon ami, and thank you for shepherding us through this session. Big thanks to WHO and UNDP also for presenting the concepts notes, and to Irem for summing it up so well. What we heard, I think, that really resonated with me was that how we talk about migration matters. Language is important. As is recognition of the good state practice that we have, and being able to bring in line with the 360-degree approach of the GCM, civil society and other actors who are key to ensuring the effective implementation of the Global Compact. And it's in that spirit that it's really encouraging to have the discussions here today. It's also a good time to remember and reflect on the existence of the hub, to encourage everybody to have a look if you haven't already done so, and go and really see what's there and how we can bring and learn from the good examples of engaging with migration through the Global Compact on migration. Right, they pointed out governments need to be proactive. Governments are at the heart of this process. It's a member state-driven process, and the initiatives that come from them should match the engagement and openness from civil society to reach out and to work with them. And that includes, of course, youth, as we heard. It includes migrant-led organizations and other actors all along the routes that migrants travel from their areas of origin to the countries where they end up or where they arrive to. So, with that in mind, we mentioned the importance of documentation, the importance of decent work, of the tripartite cooperation, and this really is an opportunity to bring all those together and to engage member states on how to make the world a better place for migrants. So thank you all for your participation, for your active engagement, for logging in, for speaking up, and I look forward to working with you on this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining this last consultation. And unless anyone else has any final remarks, we can go ahead and close the meeting, and we look forward to seeing many of you in person in Geneva in about a week and a half. Have a good day. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Gracias. Adios.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.